This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.
An American assassin, that's what we were dealing with recently. His name is Vance Bolter. He decided it would be a great idea to create a hit list and go and take out many, many people. At least that was his goal. His issues seemed to have something to do with abortion and Democrats. It was a very targeted hit list, and on that hit list, 2 individuals lost their lives. 2 ended up in very serious medical conditions after being shot multiple times by Vance. Here to discuss and break this down a little bit more, Eric Faddis, defense attorney, former prosecutor. Let's go to the legal end of this case and discuss that. We have federal authorities that are pursuing parallel prosecutions now with the state of Minnesota as well. There is no death penalty in the state of Minnesota, but when you have federal charges, that suddenly gets put onto the table. Walk us through that a little bit. How does that work? Does that mean a state trial and a federal trial? Or at one point, does the state say, you guys have them feds? Or what can we expect here as this inevitably moves in that direction?
Yeah, Tony. So there's something, called the dual sovereignty doctrine, whereby the federal government can prosecute somebody for a crime in parallel and at the same time as the state government. And so really what will happen is these 2 cases will sort of move along in parallel, but they have different considerations, different potential penalties, possibly even different outcomes. And so it gets a little bit confusing and complicated, but there are strategic reasons why the government would do that.
We obviously have the chance at that then. Federal prosecutors considering that capital punishment for the crimes. Would this case be tried in Minnesota, even if it's if I say they don't have capital punishment there, but could it happen in Minnesota and still get a death penalty as the verdict in this?
Yes. So the federal proceedings can happen on the federal level of Minnesota's court system, not the state level. And so at that federal level, certainly the death penalty is still on the table. It seems like that's probably the reason why the government chose to bring not only state charges, but also federal charges. And so, yeah, that case would move along. There would be different investigative agencies involved, but really one also comprehensive attack on Bolter from the government regarding these alleged crimes.
The big question I think a lot of people want to know, could there be more people involved in this? Rightfully so. He sent a really weird text to his family right before all this went down. Daddy is going to war tonight is basically what it said. And there was also a note that he might not be alive much longer. Interesting thing to say. One would assume maybe he's planning on going out in some sort of blaze of glory in his mind, but he was arrested, without any sort of incident. There's going to be a lot of things that are looked into, and one of the big things is what did the wife and the family know, and when did they know it, if anything at all? They did catch her driving the other day with passports, guns, money in the car, a little suspicious there. But I have to say, too, if you just found out that your spouse did this horrible, horrible crime and you had no idea, I might be wanting to leave the country, too. Not to be suspicious, but just to get the hell away from the onslaught of torturous press that's going to be coming my way. What do you think they're looking at behind the scenes right now with the family? Let's start there.
Yeah, Tony, some curious circumstances that the wife found herself in when she was contacted by authorities. Like you said, it could be that she had knowledge of what was going to happen. And the real question legally becomes, what did she do with that knowledge? Did she provide some kind of affirmative assistance? Did she provide some sort of impediment to law enforcement to ultimately discovering these alleged crimes of her husband? If so, she could be on the hook for something like accessory after the fact or obstruction or even possibly complicity. On the other hand, if she was just trying to get the heck out of Dodge and even if she had knowledge but didn't help Bolter in any way, that is probably not a criminal act and probably not something for which she can be prosecuted.
So theoretically here, let's just play the what ifs right now. If she had knowledge that her husband was an extremist, let's just play this situation that he's really into this stuff. Maybe she doesn't necessarily know exactly that he's going to carry something like this out, but says, horrible things around the house every now and then. They should die, whatever. I'm just, again, pure hypothetical. She goes to the authorities right now and just says, spills her guts. Here's everything he's been saying. I'm just the wife. He's been saying crazy things. I wouldn't know if he was serious or not. Does that absolve her of any sort of responsibility, just knowing that her significant other was out there? She didn't say something when she saw something. But again, that's not always the easiest thing to do because people do spout off.
Totally. And legally speaking, in most states, a person who has information about a crime that's going to happen does not necessarily have an affirmative obligation to go to police and tell them about it and to thwart that crime. There are exceptions for that, for like mandatory reporters and things like that. But here, if she did do that and kind of spilled her guts, that would not constitute a crime. Now, it would subject her to significant further interrogation, and they would probably be able to access her phone records, computer records after such a statement was made, and do those records further implicate her in any possible way they could. So it's kind of a tricky measure. Perhaps the person wants to come forward and give information, but they're also taking a risk in doing so, even when they did nothing wrong.
What if she did know something? What if she did have knowledge? Let's just say she had knowledge. Again, another scenario, not saying she did. This is just scenario. And we're cosplaying this horrible situation. We have to wear outfits now. So hang on. Let me get... No. Let's say she did know that he was going to do something like this. Who knows if she knew the date, the time, whatever it may be. If she came forward now and said, look, I thought he was full of shit. He was saying he was going to do that. I mean, is the best option right now for her to just get in front of this as quickly as she can, if she had any sort of knowledge whatsoever, and just say, look, I'm the innocent spouse here, says crazy things. This happened, obviously. What's her, if you're advising this woman right now, what are you telling her to do?
Yeah, there's a balance of interests here, because on the one hand, you could advise her to come forward, completely spill her guts, tell everything she knows about him and what his purported plans could have been. And perhaps that insulates her. Perhaps the government says, hey, if there was any crime you committed, we'll give you immunity so long as you testify against your husband. That's one course of action. But like I said, that could open her up to some risk. There could be something buried in her text messages or emails that looks not good. And that wouldn't be good in a nationally publicized case. On the other hand, if she just shuts up, that would maybe insulate her from further legal interrogation. But it also looks pretty darn shady. And she could have public condemnation because of that. So it'd be a really difficult advisement to give.
There's not a great path here forward for her unless she knows absolutely nothing. That would be the best thing. And it's a difference between knowing your husband has a lot of extreme political beliefs and then also sympathizing with him. If you're sitting there going back and forth on this, yes, honey, that might be a little different. To compare it to another case where a spouse goes off and does crazy things, allegedly, Rex Heuermann and Asa Elrup. She filed for divorce, but we learned in the new documentary that came out that she still loves him. She thinks he's innocent. She got divorced for protecting the assets of the family and the kids. Is that an option? Would that protect the assets if she were to get divorced at this point? It also might open her up then to not having the spousal privilege and not having to testify against your husband. So kind of a double-edged sword there. Again, what would you say as an attorney to someone who's like, here's where I'm at. What should I do?
Yeah, a lot of considerations to weigh there because, like you said, the divorce could signal some detachment from Bolter and his alleged acts and possibly protect assets going forward. I don't know. the constitution of their family, but if there were children, it could help protect that kind of thing. On the other hand, yes, spousal privilege usually only applies to someone who is presently your partner. And so if they get divorced, she can probably be called to testify as a witness against him down the road. And so while she might protect assets in doing so, she might expose herself to risk and just a really unpleasant ongoing legal proceeding with this, multi-murderer allegedly.
If she wants nothing to do with him, if she's like, okay, this is insane, I want out of this, I don't sympathize with you, I think you're nuts, you've ruined our lives, you've ruined your life, would that be the best bet? Just get the divorce, and if you have no problem testifying against him, just protect. I mean, could they still go after any of those assets, considering they were part of his at the time of the crimes?
Yes. So my understanding is he had multiple vehicles. He had a home, so he did have some assets. And usually, when there is a death, those assets can be attached in the criminal and the civil context. And it usually applies to assets that were in existence at the time that the judgment is rendered. So that's going to be down the road. That's going to be a restitution order in a criminal case or a judgment in a civil case. And so assets that existed at the time of the marriage are significant, but it's really going to matter what assets are still marital property once those judgments come down. So if she gets the divorce, I think it could legally protect the significant majority of those assets.
Yeah, I mean, we always look at like, well, how are we going to punish the guy who did this stuff? You got to think too about like the family, like, because their lives are destroyed too. And I mean, it may seem somewhat selfish because people did just lose their lives, but at the same point, if you had nothing to do with it, you do have to protect your life too from the monster that it's destroyed these people's lives and your own. So these are interesting questions, I think, that a lot of people may not know the logistics of, because it is just so kind of up in the air. This is an interesting point about this guy. He was active. He wasn't some weird guy in the basement of his mom's house listening to Hall & Oates cassette tapes and coming up with a manifesto here.
Sounds ominous.
He served, or men without hats. You never know what he's listening to down there. I don't know why I'm going to those artists, but I think I can picture those cassette tapes. Bolter and the victim, Hoffman, they served together on a state board from 2016 to 2023. So they knew each other. It makes it a little darker, but there was like 45 people on this hit list. These were some of the early ones. I mean, what does that tell us about this? Was this some sort of, hatred that you think maybe began back then? And how does that matter? How does that play into this? Obviously premeditated with the hit list, but having that connection, does that make this even more damning that there was that personal connection there and professional connection?
Yeah, I think as a current criminal defense attorney, you're thinking about what possible defenses could this guy have, and I think the history behind what happened and the history between the accused and the decedent really cuts against some kind of not guilty by reason of insanity plea, which is something that he has to consider, because it shows it wasn't just some lone wolf who's acting on, hallucinations, some animal telling him to kill people. It's really a concerted campaign that it appears he planned out for a substantial period of time. Shows premeditation. It tends to indicate that he knew what he was doing rather than, some Looney Tunes guy who was just shooting into the abyss.
And he has some experience. He owns a security guard company. And what I found interesting is the name of the security guard company, Praetorian Guard Security Services. Sounds like nothing, just some sort of name. It's like, I don't know what the Praetorian Guards, I think there was Roman soldiers that eventually rose up and killed the people they were protecting and then started inserting themselves into those positions. Little weird considering what took place here. Like, I want to know when he started the company, which I'm sure we could look up. And was this like an overall life goal for this guy, considering the name of the company?
Gosh, it seems like a really bad Freudian slip or kind of telling on himself in advance. It really creates a specter of, was he signaling to folks at some point, hinting perhaps that he had these thoughts for the future about, some massive overthrow of local or larger governments in a violent fashion, certainly that name doesn't help.
With something like this where it is so damning, again, this is like, obviously we have officers who exchanged fire with him as well before they caught him. Not immediately after they caught him. Like, it took a long time. This was at the scene of one of the homes, and then many hours later is when he was apprehended. So it's pretty cut and dry that this is the guy. There's not a lot of questions about that. Is there any room? I mean, obviously a plea deal may make the most sense to, like, not have the death penalty, but where do you think this goes? Is this a guy that's going to plead not guilty and continue to go down the road of trying to fight the fight that he thinks he's fighting, or where do you think this goes in a case like this where we have real political assassinations here?
Yeah, his possible defenses seem pretty limited from the outset. Clearly not self-defense. There's no evidence that someone else made him do it, that it was duress. There's no evidence of a credible choice of evils defense, like he had to do this or something worse was going to happen that a reasonable person would agree on. And so not guilty by reason of insanity is undercut in part by his manifesto and the plans and the deliberateness of his conduct. Do we come across some kind of conspiracy defense down the road that this was like a false flag thing, or that he was some kind of patsy who took the fall for a larger political sect that is killing politicians? In today's society, I wouldn't be surprised if those sort of conspiracies are at least explored.
And obviously, the internet is already abuzz. Some think this is the guy who hit John O'Keefe, which I find very interesting. It's like, how? Why? This is, but follow the science. But what I do, wonder about this, is there more? Obviously, that's more of an investigative question, but it does make you wonder. So I'm just kind of asking just your opinion on this. Do you think this was another lone wolf? Because those do tend to be the most dangerous. They're out there. They're operating by themselves. They're seemingly able to get quite a bit put together. The guy got a fake cop car set up and the outfit. It's some lengths to go to. Some may wonder, did it take other people involved to do that? No, not necessarily. People can be crafty. But it does make you wonder, were others involved unwittingly, unknowingly in this to help him with this? Maybe he's like, I just want to put lights on my car. Some people do that. You can't imitate an officer, but some people still do it. Anybody who's been around this guy right now and may have unwittingly had some sort of connection to him, and maybe, that makes sense. That's why he asked me to do that. What's your advice for them right now?
Man, so long as they didn't have knowledge of what he was about to do, and also that they didn't give some material aid with the hope that he carried this thing out, they would probably be protected from being an accomplice, being charged as an accomplice. But still, it's questionable because, people make offhand remarks even during these seemingly mundane transactions where if he's, buying a cop uniform from a Halloween store or something.
Yeah.
So that in itself isn't a problem. He starts making some remarks that raise some eyebrows and where a reasonable person would have said, hey, maybe I should either ask more or tell somebody. Then we're starting to get into a risky territory with these folks. And I think they need to be very cautious about, what information they provide and whether they have an attorney assisting to protect them.
From a former prosecutor standpoint, does this look like a pretty open and shut case where the evidence that is against this guy, at least as far as him being locked up for the rest of his life or getting the death penalty? Or is this something on the defense attorney side? Would you advise a client to plead not guilty and try and argue this out and see if you can get some things minimized or whatnot? What would you advise someone at this point if you were to be in that role?
According to the reports I've read, there is substantial evidence, and it takes different forms. So there's video evidence, it's my understanding, of him, with a mask and in a cop uniform, that I understand authorities can tie back to him. There's also witness evidence for the surviving people who were shot, who would help identify what happened. He had this manifesto, allegedly, that laid out all of his plans, his intentionality. So those things right there are pretty darn problematic. Can he try to broker a plea agreement? Is it possible that political motivations could come into play from the federal government that might somehow afford some kind of leniency because he appears to be on the same side politically? Let's hope not.
God.
Let's hope that's not how it works. But in reality, is that something to at least ask about? I think it is. That's
a scary prospect. Like no matter what, I don't care what side anybody's on, it should not be condoned. There should be no consideration given for the fact that this guy didn't like Democrats. But no, you're right. We are in a world where, I can see it. Does he play that card? I mean, we'd have to know who you're going up against too, which might be kind of a crapshoot. But
yeah,
and you also have jurors that could look at that way too, if you were to get there.
Yeah, and you look at, you don't want politics involved in what should be objective legal decision-making by prosecutors and the government. But history has shown that that's not usually how it plays out. There are arguments that the Trump administration should not have pardoned the January 6 folks. They, some of them destroyed property, assaulted police officers, and folks who are on the left politically haven't received the same pardons for similar crimes. Mm-hmm. So is there political favor potentially in these decisions? Yes. And is it something that at least theoretically could play a role in Vance Bolter's case? Theoretically, yes.
That'd be a very scary precedent to set if he does go to trial on this and you get a not guilty or you get a hung jury. I think it'd be hard to get a not guilty. I think it'd be really hard to get that many people lined up to go, oh yeah, could it happen? Possibly. But that would be a scary place to be in, because it would, if he were to be found not guilty, that's very much setting up a scene in a scenario where, oh, well, look, he can go get away with it. You're going to have a lot of people trying to go out there. It would be very Luigi Mangione-ish as well, because there's a lot of people concerned there. Could he get off? There is a possibility for that, even though truly, factually, he committed a crime, murdered someone. That's not a place we want to get to. And I don't know how you pull that back from there. If we do start getting there, how do you correct something like that? I don't know.
It's an important question. And I actually applauded the Trump administration and the federal government for how they've handled the Vance Bolter case so far. There haven't been any excuses made. There hasn't been any unnecessary leniency. And I think that speaks to their credit in terms of how they've handled it thus far. Let's hope it remains on that track and that political influences don't somehow cause this thing to go south even more.
Thus far being the key words.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.